products and alcohol from GST. If you want to have a higher rate on these products, so be it. If you want to restrict the credit, etc., on these products, that's fine. But please do not exclude these products from GST, because it's illogical. It's not what the country wants. I mean, 30-40% of the total tax revenues are coming from petroleum and alcohol, and if you keep it outside, that means that you have a 2/3 kind of a GST. And let's say if you talk about ATF, aviation turbine fuel, if you don't have include that included, that means airlines would pay GST on their airfare, but they will not get any offsets. So that was the recommendation, and there should be a GST monitoring cell to be constituted to basically see that once GST comes in, then for at least 1 or 2, 3 years, what is the impact of GST on inflation, on employment, on industry, and so on and so forth. This will be a monitoring body. There would be a flexibility given to states to vary the GST rates, the state GST rates, within a narrow band. In the initial draft, what it said was that whatever decision is taken by the council, that will be binding on the state government. State did not agree with that. They said, no, we are not going to go with this. We need to have flexibility to take care of emergency, to take care of my specific needs for that state, and so on and so forth. So what has been agreed is that while you will not have absolute flexibility, but you would have a range, let's say 8 to 12% or 8 to 10%, within which you can move the GST rates. Now, not an ideal situation to be in, but without this, the states were not willing to proceed. And also, it says that while there is an objective of GST Council to ensure that the harmonized structure of GST is promoted, what do you mean by harmonized structure is not clear. So that's something which they have recommended. With these amendments or with these suggestions, they have put in this report to the Parliament. After that, the Constitutional Amendment Bill has been revised appropriately. It has gone to the state governments for their approval. Hopefully, it will come in next couple of months. But what is important here to note is that this whole process, as I said, requires 2/3 approval, 2/3 majority approval from the Parliament, and 50% of the state governments to approve, and therefore it will take time. We need to ensure that petroleum products are not excluded from GST, as it would lead to distortions. More importantly, there has to be a dispute resolution. There are 2 states involved, and I have paid tax in one state, because it will be a very complicated system to start with. I mean, particularly for services. Goods, you can still trace where the goods are going, but for services, in which state the services are getting consumed and which state I have to pay tax, it's a very complicated thing. I mean, even EU has not got it right as yet. So in that situation, why do you want that person to suffer? They let the states kind of agree between themselves that which state is supposed to collect that tax. So there has to be a very effective dispute resolution system under this, and which unfortunately does not seem to be the case. And the key issue is that if we have to take care of fiscal autonomy, which is the feature of our constitution for the state, and the federal government and the state government, they have to coexist together. But at the same time, we also want a GST which is simple, which is standard. And one of the questions I think somebody asked in the earlier session, that in a country like India, where you have so much of diversity, and there's so many stakeholders, there is a thin line of balance between a fiscal autonomy and what kind of ideal GST we should have. So therefore, I think what will happen is that we would start with an imperfect kind of a GST. There will still be many things which will be excluded. There will still be many other taxes along with GST which will coexist. But as we go along, hopefully next few years, we will move to a common uniform GST as has been seen internationally. So this is what I wanted to share, just as a quick snapshot. But this amendment, when it takes place, it will be a very significant move towards implementation of GST in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pratik. Thank you. I think it goes without saying that in the whole history of tax administration in India, if there is any remarkable paradigm shift that we are likely to see, it's nothing but the GST introduction. And there are many shapes in which this is being interpreted, and there's many shapes it is planned and proposed to be, introduced. But be that as it may be, the benefits of GST is unbelievable, and more of that probably in some other session. I will not take much time on that. But as a concluding remark, I want to make 2-3 observations here. Today is Law Day, and I'm very passionate about the Constitution, and as Pratik mentioned about the Constitutional Amendment Bill. That's really heartening to hear. But let's go back in time, when the Constitution was adopted, the kind of rights and obligations that were promised and assured and, provided for in the Constitution, insofar as tax itself is concerned, insofar as tax administration is concerned, and where do we stand? So here is what the milieu is. We have a robust economy. 6 cylinders are driving in all directions, and we are making money as a country, and notwithstanding what's happening in the global world. So far as the economy is concerned, our GDP is still about 5.5 or 5.6 or whatever else. So we're doing a robust business here. When we do a robust business, we are talking about huge amount of money that is being made by the industries. Huge amount of money. Some of that is above board, some of that is below the board, but whatever it is, there's a huge amount of money that is being made. And when we talk about international businesses that is being transacted by the country, we are talking about complex business models. We have a time where we have an e-business that is there. We have a time through where maintenance is happening through a remote control. People could be sitting somewhere else in the world and they could be maintaining assets in India. The business models have gone very complex and creative. Under that kind of environment, we have a tax administration who is laggard. Like it happens, the tax administrations or the law department of every country is always laggard. They're never into lead law. And being laggard, they are constantly trying to get into your shoes or get into your skin, so to say, to try and get as much tax revenue as possible. So you have a huge, vibrant economy and you have a hugely aggressive tax administration sitting right across. Now, what are the features that you're seeing in this aggressive tax authorities? First, today, most of the litigation or most of the tax issues are coming not out of regular audits. It's happening through what we call the intelligence division of the tax administration. Sleuths are being deployed into businesses who are through the 2 agencies called Director of Revenue Intelligence and DGCI. These are the 2 specialist wings that have worked 24/7, so to say, researched the industry issues and gone behind people that they think are in their mind avoiding taxes, which means a very well-prepared department trying to take you head on. Gone are the days where the tax authority of one hapless officer sitting in one corner would have thought, oh, maybe you have done some default and let me check your books. It's not like that anymore. It's a very scientifically planned, scientifically strategized bunch of people, bunch of IRS officers applying the mind. And what comes out of that is a heavy duty show cause notice running into maybe 40, 100 pages. I mean, there was a time when I started my career, there was, show cause notices were no more than 3-4 pages. Now we have 100-page show cause notices where every minute fact is there, every statement that you have made during the summons stage is all recorded. Where will you go? So the whole strategy of the tax revenue is very aggressive, very upfront, very clear, very strategic, and very well researched. So much so at times they come to a situation where the show cause notices reads almost like an order that you have therefore defaulted. You should therefore pay tax. Whereas show causes should generally say, I believe you have defaulted, I believe you should be. So therefore there's a shift from belief to confirmation. That itself, the legality of the show cause notices are a different issue, but I'm saying that the whole methodology and the whole approach is far more grasping than what you probably had seen in the past. So that's one. On the other hand, what do? You deploy a bunch of lawyers, have a bunch of accountants to help you in all of that process. But we all realize that the first 2 years of all of that is going to be useless, because when you go to the tax authorities for your first level of discussion with them, they're all revenue minded. So you know that the commissioners and the commissioner appeals or the DRP or whatever, departmental appellate procedures are there, that's a complete waste of time, because I can say for sure, and I'm saying making a very responsible statement, no more than 1% of the cases ever get decided in favor of the SSE insofar as the departmental levels are concerned. 99%, it's like a motion. You just have to go through the motion before you can expect the first, light of justice, so to say. So therefore, you're wasting your time there. Third is when you're coming to the tribunal, and this is the state of our country today. We have, as Lord Justice Singh mentioned earlier in the morning, and some of you who were there, the number of cases that the judges of the Supreme Court are having to dispose of is enormous. But that's what he says about the Supreme Court itself. Imagine what is the pendency and the number of matters that are coming up in the tribunals and the district courts across the country. It's a baffling number. And if you have such baffling numbers across the length and breadth of the country, how many tax tribunals do you have? And why so less? You know, if we are spending crores of rupees sending our satellite to the Mars, very well. But this is a very important statistical, a very important strategic infrastructure investment that the country should be making to make sure that the tax administration becomes easier and faster. Justice delayed is justice denied. We have all learned, and this is not what is coming out from the infrastructure spend that the government is showing on that. The number of tribunals are no more, at least in the indirect taxes, no more than 4. We are talking about a country with 1 billion plus people with an economy of 6.5% GDP. I don't know what is happening. So we need to have that focus on the tax administration so far as the tribunal setups are concerned. There's a promise that there'll be 4 more to be created. But the real problem is not the money. The real problem is people are not willing to move from the bar to the bench. There are not many people wanting to move from the bar to the bench. And the other problem, at least in tax profession, what one has noticed is not many lawyers want to become tax lawyers. And they would rather be corporate lawyers, they'll rather be IP lawyers. Well, that's their choice that they're making. But tell you what, the lesser the academics and the lesser the lawyers in the tax profession, the impact is going to be felt in the judicial system as well, because you'll have lesser people moving up from the bar to the bench. So we have a bottlenecks there where we have tribunals, but they're just too overloaded. Then, even if you were to go from the tribunal to the high court level, how many high courts have more than 2 tax benches? Very few. Every high court has no more than 1 tax bench, that to a division bench. And the problem, therefore, is again the bottlenecks is happening at the high court level. And more often than not, nobody wants to take up tax matters. Because most of the judges, and I say this with responsibility, probably take up taxes out of reluctance, not by choice. So we have a scenario where there is an enormous amount of demand for benches, enormous amount of demand for judges at the bar, and especially in the higher echelon of judiciary, which is where a tax assessee is actually expecting to see the light of justice, so to say. That's the other side of the story. The more important problem that I also see is that, one of the biggest canons of taxation is, what we call the canon of certainty. I must know what I'm paying taxes for. I must know what the law is. I do not want to be interpreting law myself every day. So there should be a certainty. The government, through the parliamentary system or the state legislatures, have come out with what is called an authority of advanced ruling or determination of disputed question. Appalled to see that there is only 1 bench in this country for an advanced ruling authority in India. Appalled to see that. It's a constitutional authority or a statutory authority, but there's only 1 bench. The delay of dispensation of justice from that authority of advanced ruling is so much that people have realized this is not even worth their time to even go there. Why can't we have authority of advanced ruling in every zone? The idea is to have clarity. Why must you have all of that in Delhi? New Delhi is not the panacea for everything that you have in this country. The third problem is the judges or the members of the authority of advanced ruling are all retired Supreme Court judges. With due respect to that, there's very, very hard time that the government has to find such judges that are willing to take on that. There are none, because you have to wait for a Supreme Court judge to retire, and that Supreme Court judge has to actually give consent that he's willing to take up a job, that too in an authority of advanced ruling. You'll have to search for such a person to be able to don that particular bench, else the bench does not constitute at all. So some serious thinking will have to happen that yes, while we have created such passionate, interesting structure, make it workable in a meaningful way so that it can sustain, so that people can have faith. People can use it as much to their advantage, the purpose for which it was created. The last and the most important thing is the retrospective amendments that the central government does. You fight your battle until the Supreme Court and you win your case, and then suddenly the parliament uses its inherent power, so to say, to make a change retrospectively. I have no dispute about the fact that the parliament does or does not have their propriety to do so. Parliament has all the right. Parliament can make the law. It's the supreme authority when it comes to law. It can make retrospective laws also. But at what cost? Who are you making this law for? The citizen of the country. You represent the people of the country. And if you're going to come out with strategies and action that is going to impact the confidence level of the citizen of India in terms of their well-being, then what is this tax collection for? So a thin balance or a proper balance between desire to collect revenue to sustain your GAD, as they say, gross deficit, and making sure that business feels confident that this is a country that we would like to have our operations going on, that has to be driven. So in an overall, I think the message that I want to pass is more is less. More amount of lawyers for the tax profession is less. We need some more as well. More judges is less because there are some more needed. More tax professionals in the profession is less. More benches are less, and everything you need more of that. Thank you very much. I think we are closing the panel. If you have any questions, fine. Else, I think it's lunch, right? Oh, there's a question? Okay.
Sir, I want to ask you that we really don't know when GST will come. But we could see all the departments like FICCI, Department of Revenue, and all the good firms working for the internships and all for GST. What are your views that will it lead to economic growth, a good economic growth, or will it witness a stagnant growth like we observe in the current years of coming up of VAT? And the second part of the question is that it will lead to closing up of all the indirect taxes department. How will you tackle with the issues of unemployment, more technology, more skills? And how will you make public understand that it is good for their benefit, it will decrease the consumer final product cost?
That's such a loaded question that I need one full day to answer that. But let me try and summarize it in a very small manner. If the whole world has gone for GST, they must have done it because there is something good about it. It has got tested in about more than 72 countries, so I'm told. Insofar as whether it is going to create a buoyancy in the economy, it has to. It has no choice. Because the whole purpose of GST is to eliminate cascading of taxes. Businesses should not pay taxes. Taxes should be paid by the consumer. So the businesses will unlock some of its capital investment or cash investment on taxes and utilize it into far more development activity. So it has to have a buoyancy effect in the economy. It will also take care of the parallel economy or the black money, so to say, because if you want to claim credits of taxes, you have to be within the chain. You cannot be outside the chain. So it has to have an effect. But the more important question that I think you ask is what is going to happen to the employment? Employment, I am assuming in the context of the tax officers. They will all get redeployed.